the Healing Health Podcast. I'm Amber Petty. In this episode, I'll be talking to Professor Samantha Thomas from Deakin University's Institute for Health Transformation. We sat down together to discuss her research on how gambling marketing affects both us and our children. So join us now in the conversation. So, Samantha, thank you for joining me for our chat about gambling, which is fascinating, and especially in respect to the impact of marketing gambling on children. You've done some really interesting research directed around children and the impact of marketing for them. Why is it important to monitor marketing and gambling for children? What's the concern there?
So I guess it's important to first of all set the context of Australia and gambling.
Yes.
And if you talk to anyone about Australians and gambling, people would say we're a nation of punters. We've had this gambling tradition since, the war, playing two up and so on, that Australians would bet on anything, including two flies crawling up a wall. And actually, when you look at the statistics, Australians are the biggest gamblers in the world per capita.
Oh, really?
So if there was an Olympic Games for gambling or gambling losses, Australia would win the gold medal hands down. We spend we lose about $23 billion every year on gambling. It's about $1,200 per person. It's a lot of money.
Wow.
And most people will participate in some form of gambling at least once a year. Now, that might just be buying a lottery ticket, having a bet on the Melbourne Cup each year. But for some people, this is a very, very regular pattern of behaviour. And so our concern with kids really is around how the gambling environment has changed really rapidly in Australia in the last decade. So 10 years ago, if you were watching a game of footy on the television, you wouldn't be bombarded with gambling ads for a range of different bookmakers or gambling providers. Now, if you think about it, a 9-year-old has never ever watched, or a 10-year-old has never watched a game of football in Australia without seeing gambling ads embedded in it. And so for us, that's really important in starting to think about how does this actually shape what kids think about gambling, their attitudes towards gambling, their awareness of it, and most importantly, their intentions to gamble when they're older.
Wow, that's just absolutely staggering. So prior to 10 years ago, and excuse my ignorance, but were people illegally betting on the football?
No, so betting on sport has been around for a long time and people have been able to bet on sport for a long time. Yeah. What happened 10 years ago was that there was a bookmaking company who was based in one part of Australia and wanted to advertise their product in another part of Australia. And that part of Australia was Western Australia, which we think is kind of a bit of a shining example in Australia because they're the only part of Australia that doesn't have poker machines outside of the casino. So this company wanted to advertise their products in that part of Australia, and Western Australia said, no, we don't want that advertising here. The company took them to the High Court and the company won. And what that meant was that bookmakers could be based in one part of Australia, but were able to promote and market their products all the way across Australia. And that suddenly made Australia a very lucrative market for international bookmakers to come here because suddenly they could promote their products everywhere. So in Australia, most of those bookmakers are based up in the Northern Territory. They're registered up there and they come under their regulations up there. And what that means is that companies who are based up in the Northern Territory are able to promote their products right the way throughout Australia. And that's why we've started to see this big saturation of gambling advertising in sports. Obviously, for bookmakers, where the market is sports is the product. And so creating that alignment between betting and sport has been really, really important for them.
Wow.
There are a range of companies that then started advertising on television, and the advertising came quite quickly, but it was quite different to what we see now. So the first types of advertising that we saw for these companies were basically ads that showed a bunch of losers in a TAB, like really quirky, weird people, and the ads were pitched at young men in particular, saying, don't go here to place your bet, get onto your computer and place a bet.
Okay.
Now what we see kind of in the evolution of this product, which is just a high-tech product, so you can bet now on your mobile phone 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. We had one guy in one of our studies who said, I can sit on the beach and punt through my phone now. Now what we see from the bookmakers is that actually they're promoting lots of deals, lots of different ways to gamble, funny kind of videos that we see from the bookmakers, lots of humour, but definitely lots of different companies all competing for that very small part of the market, which is why we see that saturation across our sports.
Right. And so in Australia, what would be the most lucrative space or sport code that, your Betfairs and all your gambling companies are wanting to advertise on?
Right. So probably it's worth saying, first of all, that poker machines are still our biggest form of gambling in Australia. Okay. So that's a form of gambling that most people lose money on. It's the most harmful form of gambling. Sometimes we refer to pokies as the crack cocaine of gambling because they are so highly addictive and cause so much harm in our communities. So betting is something that's kind of emerged on the market and has started to become more popular, and we've started to see much more losses in terms of the markets around betting. We generally see that betting occurs on our big sporting codes, so the AFL, the National Rugby League. Now we know that betting on things like the National Basketball Association, the NBA, is very popular. And so cricket is another one. So those big codes are the ones that are the most popular. But you can bet these days on sports all over the world. You can bet on hockey in Canada, you can bet on Gaelic football in Ireland, you can bet on the English Premier League in the UK, as well as the sports that we have here in Australia, and also some very strange sports that you wouldn't normally think of. You can bet on the bowls and all sorts of different things. So I guess the point of that is that betting and gambling is easier than it's ever been before, and we know it's particularly targeted at young men. They are the ones that experience the most harm, but the generation that is growing up seeing all of this marketing are children. And so whether it's intentional or not for children to be targeted by this marketing, they're exposed to it. And what we look at in our research is what actually does that do to children's perceptions of gambling just being something that's a normal and everyday part of sport that you would do when you walk through the gates at the MCG to sit down and watch your favourite teams play.
Well, I can see kind of the correlation to what you said at the start, which is staggering that we are the biggest nation in the world for gambling. And obviously that is part of our culture. So our culture starts when you're, a child. It's the things that you pick up on, and it's the nostalgia and the things that you end up believing are about having a good time or... I guess what's interesting is that actually the vast majority of Australians don't bet very often or don't gamble very often. So while we've got this perception that we're a nation of gamblers, actually when you look at the statistics, most people don't gamble very regularly at all. Yeah. What we don't know is the impact of these new environments for kids who, when they turn 18, will be able to legally gamble. Yeah. And we know with kids there are a whole range of things that are very, very influential for them. And we know this through research that was done in tobacco control and in alcohol and in junk food even, that there are some things that kids that are very influential for kids in determining their consumer behaviours. So one of those is celebrity endorsement. So when you have the logos of your favourite player or logos of a betting company plastered on the chest of your favourite player, that creates a very symbolic interaction between the gambling company and the sports and the heroes that kids love. The second thing, I guess, is just this overall alignment between betting and sport. So sport is something that kids value. It's generally seen as a healthy activity. It's everywhere we go. But gambling has become so embedded in that. And when we talk to kids, a lot of them now think that it is
just a normal part of sport. So 75% of kids in our research think that gambling is a normal or common part of sport. The other thing, of course, is their peers and their family and so on. But what we found from our research with betting is that most parents actually don't bet. They haven't grown up with this type of gambling. So our question is, where are kids getting their information from? And our research shows that the marketing is very, very influential in creating this idea for kids that this is a normal thing that everyone does.
There's a much higher, I would imagine, exposure these days for kids because there are so many ways to get to people. Environments, like just everywhere.
Right. So the media channels today are much different than they were, when I was growing up with tobacco advertising, where you might be watching the cricket and you'd see some hoardings for tobacco and you might see the odd ad. There's, the famous ads that we all know about with people like Paul Hogan in them and so on. But today we've got not just commercial break advertising, but we've got, if you watch the basketball, there may be logos on the court or dynamic signage that runs around the outside. We've got, things that wrap around the goalposts with the betting companies' logos on it. If you watch the cricket, there's no boundary rope anymore. There's, Bet365 hoardings that go and have replaced the cricket rope. If you look at social media, there's a lot of targeted advertising through platforms like YouTube and Instagram and so on. So the thing with the media environment these days is that it's almost impossible to escape the marketing. And that's why we really are starting to say, well, actually, do we need a tobacco solution to this where we actually start to regulate this out of the main media environments for kids?
Yeah. So tell me how you went about your research with kids, like research with kids. What does that look like? What's the process? What kind of areas do you cover to get out the right information?
So we're so lucky. Working with kids is fabulous.
Is it?
Kids are incredibly honest. They are so savvy around what they see. They're quite different to when I grew up. They're very opinionated. They have very strong views on things. But also they're incredible in terms of what they see and what they're aware of in their everyday environment. So I don't think we give kids credit enough for just having really smart, well-informed ideas. And we don't actually use their voices enough to say to policymakers, hey, listen to this 8-year-old. He's saying things need to change. Maybe we need to think about that. So what we did, or what we do in our research, is we spend a lot of time in the community talking to kids. So we tend not to do kind of online surveys with them. We like to sit with them in the community and talk to them face to face. We do a whole range of different activities with kids. So some of the things that we do with them, and the basic thing that we always ask kids first up, which we always say to parents, if you're worried about your kids' awareness of this, ask them this question, which is, how many gambling companies do you know the names of?
Gosh, that would be terrifying.
Very easy question for kids. Yeah. And when you sit there and you have an 8 or a 9 or a 10-year-old who can rattle off the name of 4 or 5 bookmakers, suddenly it dawns on you that these messages are getting in. Yeah. So kids have what we call very high brand recall and awareness of betting company commercials. They're able to tell you the names of the companies. They're able to tell you the colours that the companies are. So if we put an example of an ad and we mask all the branding and the logos, they're able to identify which company that is. And the reverse, if we just put the name of the company up and say, what colour is this company? They'll say, oh, that's green, or that's orange, or that's blue. So incredible awareness of these companies and the things that distinguish the companies from each other. Kids are also able to tell us the marketing promotional styles for each of the companies. So again, we'll say to them, can you remember an ad that you've seen recently for a company? And they will be able to describe almost word for word the ad that they've seen. So there was this guy and he was sitting on the toilet and his girlfriend rang him and then the battery was running down on his phone and so on.
Wow.
Or what we're seeing more from kids these days is they're able to tell you what we call inducement promotions. So I like this company because they tell me in their ad that if I bet $50 on them and I lose, they'll give me my money back. So kids are quite good at parroting back to you exactly the promotions that they've seen from these companies. It's quite extraordinary. And we did a piece of research actually a few years ago where we gave kids a whole range of different brands and asked them to pick their favourite brand. And more kids were picking a gambling brand than an alcohol brand as their favourite brand. So junk food's still number one, but it's interesting to see that gambling has overtaken even alcohol in kids' awareness of different products and their environments. So I guess that's the first thing, is what is their awareness of these companies and what they do.
High.
Very, very high for kids. So, most of the studies we've done here and in the United Kingdom, we've got at least over 75%, sometimes up to 80% of kids over the age of 8 who can tell you the name of at least one gambling company. So, and it's extraordinary.
We totally forget that when it comes to like learning a language, or we say, expressions like, they're like little sponges, children, and, it's so hard to learn a language once you get older. It's, it's best to learn another language when you're a child because their brains are so fresh and alert and absorbing that we forget that and they're doing that all the time.
And
so what's around them?
Yeah, and they're also exposed to things that we don't necessarily see as adults. So when we first started this work and we were testifying to government inquiries, there was a lot of rhetoric from the gambling companies that, parents should just educate their kids about gambling. And that was really interesting to us because when we talked to kids and parents, parents were desperately trying to talk to their kids about gambling, but they couldn't compete with the saturated messages that were coming about gambling through sport at the time. Kids nowadays, and we've done a piece of research very recently that's shown that kids don't just see gambling ads on commercial break television. They see a lot of ads through social media channels. So if I'm a parent sitting, I've got 2 boys, 15 and 11, and if I'm sitting watching the telly with them, and kids have very different media consumption patterns than we have, they're much more hooked into things like Netflix and YouTube than we are, kind of sitting down watching Channel 7.
Free to wear. It's what we've always had.
Yes. So kids are more likely to be, so if kids are sitting down watching the TV, you can see what they're seeing. If they're on their iPad and watching YouTube content, you can't see what they're seeing in many ways. And what we know from our research is a significant number of kids, almost half, say that they have seen promotions for gambling companies in the middle of a YouTube video that they're watching, or I don't know if you know, but when you watch a YouTube video, you have to see an ad before
the pre-rolls or the ads, and then you skip in, you can skip over, but after you've been served a certain amount of that ad.
Exactly. Or if they're on Snapchat or Instagram, they may get a promotion for a gambling company that pops up in their feed. So there's a lot of gambling content that kids are seeing that we as parents don't necessarily know about. Now, the Australian government did something to try and address that. What they did was that they banned gambling commercials in live sport up until 8:30 p.m. So it was kind of the first step that we'd had to try and restrict and limit kids' exposure to these ads. So at the time, everyone thought this was a pretty great idea, and it was a really good step forward. But when you look at the details, and kind of the devil is in the detail with a lot of these things, we then did a study with kids after the ad ban to see if it had had any difference. And what we did is we asked very basic questions. So again, we do a lot of research with kids, which is what I call you don't say research, where you think, why do we have to ask this? And you need it because you need the evidence base to be able to argue for things to change. So we went out, we did a study with some great community basketball associations, and we sat with kids and we said, so, do you watch sport? And they went, yes, we do. And so we said, well, at 8:30 at night, do you turn off the television and go to bed? Because that's when the gambling ads come on. And the kids went, no. Why would we do that? And so again, some of these regulations that we're developing don't actually match kids' media viewing patterns. The regulations don't get rid of any of the sponsorship logos that sit in the ground. They don't get rid of the jersey sponsorship, the stuff we see at the stadium, and they definitely don't do anything about social media promotions. But also, there are a whole range of loopholes for this. So if you've got kids who are fans of the NBA, which I do, if they're watching the NBA on ESPN, which is considered to be a minor audience channel, there are gambling ads that sit all the way through that. There is no restriction on those channels. So again, when we talk to kids, sometimes what we see is that the things that are put in place to try and protect them actually don't go far enough in actually doing enough to restrict that promotion. And the reason we know from tobacco control that we need to start to do that is to prevent exactly what we've seen in our research, which is to prevent, that brand recall and awareness, to prevent kids from developing loyalty to brands from a young age, and to prevent them ultimately from saying, this is something that's normal that I will do when I turn 18.
And this is something that people do in a joyful space, which is around, you're barracking for your favourite club or, whatever, the joy that comes out of sport.
Yeah.
To then have the sort of the mate of sport being, betting, that's still seen, I guess, as a joyful kind of space.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think a lot of the promotions that we see for gambling make it look like it's fun and it's exciting and that it's going to make the game more exciting for you. So we see a lot of commercials. We've got groups of boys getting together, gambling together and so on. But also the thing I guess that we're most concerned about are the ads which create a perception for kids that there is no risk attached to gambling. So if you're to ask an adult, most adults will tell you that gambling is an inherently risky activity. It's about risk. It's about putting something down to try and get more out of it, but potentially you lose. And in order for the gambling industry to make money, people have to lose. That's the principle behind it. When kids see these promotions, which we call inducement promotions, which are, your cash back offers, your bonus bet offers, your money back guarantees, what that does is it creates an impression for children that gambling has no risk attached to it. So when we ask
presenting
kids,
constantly one side, which is great, you've won, this is good.
Or you've lost, so we'll give you your money back. If you bet on this and you don't get the outcome you want, then we'll give you your money back up to a dollar value. So, bet on, I don't know, whoever to kick the first, Dustin Martin to kick the first goal. And if Richmond goes on to lose the game, we'll give you your money back up to $50. So kids see that and think, oh, well, that's okay because I can't lose.
Yeah.
And that's a really powerful message for kids around gambling. Gambling's a risky activity, and if kids think that there's no risk attached to it, then suddenly it becomes something that's quite seductive for them to participate in.
How will you change tomorrow? Design a future beyond your own. Design a future that makes a difference. Deakin's research students are the best and the brightest, with access to global leading researchers, world-class facilities, industry partnerships, and innovative research centres, designing cutting-edge solutions that make an impact. Become a change maker. Become a Deakin research student. To discover more, go to deakin.edu.au/research. Deakin, more than a university.
In terms of that strategy, okay, so we give this, assumption that you really can't lose, because if you bet, you'll get $50 back, and that exactly the example you just expressed. Do you know that is like a strategy that is part of the brainwashing collectively to say gambling, betting, it's okay? It's the risk factor is not there. Like, is it that sinister? I'm sure it probably is.
Look, I actually don't think these companies are evil. I think they're
no, that's interesting.
And it's because I think that they're companies that are driven by a profit motive, and their job is to make money. So in actual fact, they're doing their job. That's what they're there to do. So I always say that the betting industry is actually just a high-tech industry with gambling at the centre of it. So what we have to start thinking about is whose responsibility is it to start to control some of this behaviour that we see from some of these companies. Now, a lot of people say, well, the betting companies need to be more responsible. I actually disagree with that. I think actually it's the job of government to create very, very robust regulations and legislation that the gambling companies need to operate within. So, for example, it's not up to the sporting codes to make decisions about whether they will or won't have sponsorship from the betting companies. It's up to the government to say, actually, we can see that this is a big issue for our kids and for young men and for other people. We've got a historical template from tobacco, which showed us what happened when we had all of that sponsorship embedded within our sport. So if we base our policy on kind of parallel evidence or logic based on parallel evidence from that, exactly, Australia, one of the most successful in terms of tobacco reduction strategies in the world, then logically this isn't right. And we need to now create some regulation that deals with not just the commercial break advertising, but also the promotions that we see and also the sponsorship. And we need to look at it as a whole. So I think gambling companies are doing their job. They are doing it very, very effectively. But it's up to government to come in and determine what's okay and what's not for our communities. And ultimately, I think everyone can agree that governments should inherently develop policies and regulations that protect children and protect the health and well-being of children.
Yeah.
And
is there a person within the government that is literally assigned to, looking after kids in relation to marketing in general, but specific or also, gambling marketing and its effects?
Yeah, so the regulation of marketing is a federal issue, so it's a federal government issue, which is quite different from poker machines, which are regulated on a state-based issue. Yeah. There are lots and lots of discussions that go on around what this should look like, but the government's solution was to put in place this 8:30 ban, and our research now shows that that doesn't go far enough. Interestingly, there have been a number of kind of children's advocacy organisations that have said this is a really important policy issue for kids and we need to think through it very carefully. At the moment, that 8:30 ban that we have is really an arbitrary cutoff. We don't know where that came from, but we know that most kids, and particularly teenagers, will stay up well past 8:30 at night.
I was going to say that because when we talk about kids, everyone probably has a little bit of a different idea of what kids are. So what are the ages that you did your research on? Because immediately I jumped to a judgment of when you said the 8:30 cutoff. I'm thinking of 8 and 9-year-olds, and I'm thinking, that should really then be the responsibility. Why are those kids watching television after that? And then, of course, I suddenly went, this is potentially teenagers, which are still kids as well. So what was the age?
So we look at young people kids and young people from the age of 8 to 18. 18 is the legal age of gambling. Okay. So we look across the spectrum. And the reason we start at 8 is that's because when we find that kids start to have an understanding of what's going on with gambling, so they're able to start to articulate things. But prior to that, we know that we hear stories of 6 and 7-year-olds talking about the odds. But for us, in terms of research, 8 is when they really start to understand marketing and what it's trying to do, and they recall a lot more than the younger children. But really, ultimately, I guess what we're seeing is that younger children still have, so 8 to maybe 13 or 14-year-olds, still have quite a high recall of these companies and their promotion strategies. What we find as they get older is that their intentions to gamble become stronger. So about a fifth of kids will tell us that they would like to place, or they think that they will bet or gamble when they're older. And when we ask kids what they might gamble on, most kids would generally say, well, I'll probably gamble on my footy team because I know a lot about them, so I have a better chance, or I'm more skilled at making a judgment which would be successful for gambling. So kids are very aware that in a way what they think is that they'll be a better gambler if they're more aware of sports or their sporting teams. We have a thing which we call the fence sitters. So kids are quite interesting with gambling. Either they'll say, yes, I will, or no, I won't. So some kids, and a lot of kids, have very moralistic views around gambling. They think it's bad. Most kids in our research think that the amount of advertising is terrible and want governments to do something more to protect them.
And where are they getting those ideas from? Is that from parents, or are they going to certain schools that are, talking about
I don't know where they're getting that from, but
is it their
when we talk,
instinct maybe.
Absolutely. And I wonder if it's because kids inherently know about tobacco and they've lived through a range of different things, junk food, so they're much more aware of their media environments and much more critical of it. And also we've had a lot of media noise about gambling ads and the problem with them. But we have what we call a group called the fence sitters. So they're the ones that are not sure whether they will gamble or they won't. And the thing that is most influential in convincing them to gamble is marketing. So for those kids, what they'll tell us is, I don't know if I'll gamble when I'm older or not, but if a company gives me a good deal, I'll probably have a go.
Wow.
And so that's really interesting. It just shows the power of marketing.
Yeah. And so is there an age specifically, or a little shorter window of an age bracket that the fence sitters like that are? Like,
no,
are they
but
like
we do
sort of
find that they're mainly
a little older?
No,
or?
we tend to find that they're girls rather than boys. So boys have quite clear views. Girls, and I guess it shouldn't be surprising to us because girls are fans of sport and are exposed to the gambling marketing just like everyone else is.
Of course.
And so we definitely are seeing an increase in the number of girls who tell us that they will probably bet on sport when they're older, and that's been quite a change over the last couple of years in our research. Girls generally weren't interested in it at all. Now we're seeing a number of girls. Girls definitely have the same level of awareness and brand recall as boys. Boys traditionally have always said that they would want to gamble more than girls, but we're now seeing this group of girls who are starting to say, yeah, that's probably something that I might have a go at. So that's interesting. But the positive thing for us, I guess, is this point that most kids are very critical of the marketing that they see. They don't like it. They don't like how much it bombards them. They say it's annoying, and they give very, very clear calls to governments and to sporting codes to do something more to protect them. And again, this is one of the reasons why we love talking to kids, because they are so opinionated about this and so concerned about why there isn't more done to protect them. So they inherently know that this is an adult product, that it's pitching them something that potentially is not okay for them, and question why they have to sit through this when they're watching their favourite football team or sports team on a Saturday night with their parents.
Is it so? Obviously, you're referring to television there. Do you go into with that research? Do you go into, for instance, so you've got obviously being at a game, you've got watching it on television, you've got being on an iPad, looking at YouTube, watching a game back, or watching any show. I mean, I would hope that kids, depending on what ages they are either watching something very kid related on an iPad or potentially watching a game back via an iPad. But I would hope that, betting ads aren't popping up in the kids' shows. I would imagine YouTube has some sort of responsibility over where those ads are placed and who books them. So I guess the categories, all of these different ways that you can be looking at something, phone, iPad, computer, television, do you go into which mediums or platforms they're seeing more annoyance or where they're getting the most awareness from?
So I think the most concern with kids is the marketing during sport. So I think that's still on television. On television. So I think that's
at the game.
I think that's still the thing that kids are most concerned about. But kids media content viewing, particularly if they're fans of sport, is quite interesting. So quite often they'll watch highlight packages, or again, if they're fans of the basketball, they'll be watching dunk competitions or crazy clips of all the great things that have happened over the last week. And so that's not kind of formal programming in a way. That might run through a YouTube channel or a YouTuber talking about lots of different things, and that's where we start to see the ads pop up. But it can pop up pop up in any content. So we shouldn't just think that this is just within sport. We know that gambling ads run at all sorts of times of the day, and they also pop up in a lot of non-sporting related content. So if you're watching Survivor or The Project or The Bachelor, things that actually are probably considered family entertainment, you will see gambling ads pop up in those programs as well. So that's the thing, I guess, that's interesting about it, is that these ads are popping up everywhere. And it's very, very hard without that really clear government regulation to actually start to reduce and restrict children's exposure to that. And what we know from tobacco is that advertising had a huge impact on children's initiation of smoking and their continuation of smoking and their preference for certain brands. So again, really, really important, and the kids say this as well, that government actually steps in to do something about this, rather than putting the responsibility back on parents to have a chat with the kids about what they're seeing, or for sporting codes to do the right thing, or for broadcasters to do the right thing, which I think is even more tricky.
Somewhere maybe between what China has done and where we are now.
Maybe.
Just going, no more NBA. That's like incredible. I mean, it's really like we live in this world where it's, in terms of like all of these new content platforms and areas to market, it's like bamboo growing, isn't it, really?
Right.
Because it is ever-changing. Everyone's spending, it's no longer that, I worked within a media agency a few years back, and their constant struggle, which will always be, is once upon a time they used to be this big, powerful media agency that booked their clients advertising onto TV, into, we'll do a News Limited package, we'll do some outdoor advertising, and that was kind of, and some radio advertising. That was the sort of scope of where things were, which obviously is a lot easier to manage and for a government to regulate. It's like, okay, well, we just need to keep an eye on these handful of areas, like they would have had to have done with, the cigarette tobacco industry, saying, okay, right, these are all the key players. Now here are all the new regulations for you guys. But it's just, and the problem is, I think, as you said, it's not enough to say to parents, you need to really monitor this, because the average, I think, 40-plus person doesn't understand where all of these new evolving spaces are. They probably don't realise that if they've got one iPad within a household and anybody has looked up anything close to betting related or gambling, then the kid's going to come along and use their iPad and probably be served betting ads on the side somewhere.
Right, and I guess the other point I'd add is that it's not our job to have to do that.
Yeah.
We as parents should not have to be monitoring all the different things that our kids are exposed to. So gambling, we know, is an adult product. It's not a product for children. And as parents, we shouldn't be constantly having to race around trying to work out what kids are exposed to. The government needs to be responsible in terms of working out all of these different things, including, this doesn't happen for kids, but for adults, the text messages that they get and the emails that they get at certain times of day and so on, and saying, all right, we need to actually look at this comprehensively like we did with tobacco. It's not the job of parents to constantly have to run around trying to work out what your kids are or aren't seeing.
Yeah. And, I think parents should be being parents, which is nurturers, educators, emotional educators, like all of those, routine, security, all of those things, taking kids to school. Like there is enough going on, I think, for but then also you do have to go, okay, I'm monitoring computer time, phone time, iPad time, but then on top of that, if it was down to just parents to be in charge of all of this stuff, there wouldn't be many good parents. So they'd be so busy trying to be the new modern parents, trying to stop them from all of this stuff and not having time to give them all of the basics.
Yeah. And I think, look, when you talk to parents, we've done a number of studies with parents and with the general community, people don't like gambling ads. They don't like seeing gambling ads. They see
through it, the joy and the...
Yeah, they don't like them. They don't like seeing them on the television. This is something that they think that government needs to do more to regulate and restrict so that, everyone in the community isn't exposed to these, but particularly kids. And that's where I think we've got a little bit of a disconnect, where the government took a little bit of a step forward, which was fabulous, but didn't actually do a complete job in terms of working out all of the different things that they needed to get on top of to really properly limit children's exposure to these products. You can never guarantee that kids won't see anything
of course not.
everywhere, but you can do the best you possibly can to reduce that exposure. And we know what a great impact that had on reducing kids' uptake of smoking, reducing the continuation of smoking. So we know from tobacco that it had a massive impact, and it can work for gambling as well.
Something that people thought, something that my generation and my parents' generation would have thought back then, oh no, it's too far gone. You've got, it's addiction. People will always support that. You can't undo that. Mm-hmm. It's extraordinary to see, isn't it, to live in that lifetime of where we were the kids marketed to now thinking how absurd it would be if those advertising, if the tobacco companies were still being able to market yet something that can be as harmful as gambling is still there for kids now.
Exactly. And I think that's why we need to start to listen to kids and parents, and governments really need to step up and pay attention. We've used this research to create awareness for governments all over the world, really. We're starting to see a range of different countries enact bans. So Australia really was the first country to start to lead the way in restricting and reducing gambling advertising during sport. Some countries have implemented complete bans.
Who's some of the
countries like Spain have started to think about that and implementing complete bans. The UK now is looking to take a step further than Australia did, and they're looking at a whistle-to-whistle ban, so across all of the game at all times of day. So Australia really is now starting to fall behind a bit. We were the ones that actually started to take good steps forward. Now we need to look at the evidence that shows that what we did hasn't gone far enough, and we actually need to take some more steps forward to protect kids, which I think inherently is something that everyone would agree that we need to do.
Yeah. I love that kind of, even from a marketing concept, that whistle to whistle, because it's something kind of like, paints a picture, is a discussion point and feels good, doesn't it? From whistle to whistle, stay out of this, we're keeping it healthy.
Absolutely, and we think that should be applied not just to commercial break advertising, but also the hoardings at the stadium where, if you're watching a game, you see that advertising pop up again and again. It's dynamic, it catches your attention, the logos on the jerseys, the logos on the court. All of that should be removed from sport so that people can watch the game without feeling like they have to bet on it as well.
What is your short-term, goal or desire that you would like to see of government? And then is there a bit more of a pie-in-the-sky sort of long-term goal that you'd like to see in terms of Australia specifically changing?
So when I first started working in this area about 7 or 8 years ago, I gave a talk at a conference where I said this was going to be a really big issue for kids, and within 5 years we needed to look at restrictions on advertising, and people at the conference laughed.
Wow.
And within 5 years, we got the banning of live odds promotion in sport. We got great restrictions, a good step forward in restricting commercial break advertising within sport. So it just shows that with a group of really principled people, some principled politicians who really got behind this issue and did an incredible job at saying,
who are some of those? Can you call out some of those good people?
No, I won't. But they come from all... They come from all political parties. And I think that this is the interesting thing about gambling, is that there are people across every single political party who say, actually, this is not good for our kids. So it's one of those rare issues where you kind of get some unified voices across the political spectrum, which I think is a great thing. So we had principled politicians, we had good advocates. The thing that I think made a huge difference is that we had politicians standing up in the Victorian Parliament and the Australian Parliament reading out from our research what kids had to say about this issue.
Oh, fantastic.
So I think ultimately the kids themselves drove some of this change. And, when all of that came together, we had great journalists who kept on with this story. We actually started to say to governments, we need something done about this, and government acted. So I actually think that eventually we will get a ban. I think it's going to be tough. And I think our big challenge now is saying, actually, I know it looks like we've done something, but it hasn't gone far enough, and we need to keep tackling this and keep moving forward with it. But I'm really positive that with the weight of research and with the community concern around this issue, that we actually will see the tide change and people and governments start to really restrict and regulate, particularly the advertising that we're seeing, which is a great thing.
What about, so if you're just sort of an average person and it is annoying you and you want to do something about it, is there somewhere you can kind of go and put your voice down, a petition or something, or, you know, your local member? Like, what do you do that can be putting your complaint in?
I think some of the best things that people can do are to actually make sure that they keep nudging this issue on social media platforms, keep talking about it amongst their friends. You know, you don't have to be, as an advocate, you know, standing on the steps of Parliament, you know, with a megaphone shouting out that this is a terrible thing. There are lots of things that people can do to keep this conversation going, calling into, you know, radio stations to talk back, to express their concerns with this, you know, having every single opportunity that they can to actually talk about this as being an issue for our kids. And I think with that collective community pressure, we'll see change. The worst thing we can do is just to accept that this is what it is now and we don't need to do anything else, or we can't do anything else.
Yes.
So that collective voice and kids themselves getting involved will be really important going forward.
Yeah, I love what you say about kids, because I think, you know, we've only had to, you know, we've seen lately with, you know, all of the climate change talk and the Greta, what's it, Steinberg? Greta?
Yeah.
Yep. You know, that, and even the guns in, you know, the shootings in America, it really is the kids that are suddenly the ones that are standing up and having a say. And it is, you know, trend is not a great, it feels like I'm using the wrong word, but, you know, it is a great trend, I think, that is happening in the world, that I think is really, really important, because, as you said, I think people would be so surprised at how intelligent and intuitive our children are when it comes to something like gambling, that most people would think, oh, that go over their head. That's not something that they would realise. I think that would be a good way to really kind of like attention.
When kids are informed, we did a whole range of educational kind of lectures with kids and workshops with kids in the UK, and kids kind of started off coming into the room going, why are we here? And you could see as we presented the information to them that they were becoming more and more agitated about this, particularly when we showed the parallels with tobacco. And those kids have now gone off and been incredible advocates in the UK, at the Welsh Parliament and so on. So
that's the other thing. You're also, as part of this research, or part of, you know, the, I guess, the snowball effect of your research is that you are building, creating and growing these leaders, you know, protective leaders against the gambling, you know, the harm that it can cause, you know, as they go on and get out there in the world.
Yeah, and whether that's, you know, mums and dads or sporting heroes, you know, we've had a number of great AFL athletes who have come out and spoke about their concern around this, people like Easton Wood and Harry Taylor, whether it be the kids themselves or whether it be researchers, you know, collectively, I think that's a pretty powerful movement to start to build.
Yeah, and I think for all the toxic sort of negative effects that, you know, this new digital kind of ever-evolving kind of bamboo kind of growing landscape is, it's also there to do good. So as you said, if you have an issue about anything, that is where social media can be a good platform. It's just create the conversation and get that moving.
Yeah.
Get people to, you know, join in with you.
Yeah,
Thank you so much. Really fascinating.
Thanks for having me.
Enjoyed it. Thank you very much. Thanks for joining in the conversation with us about our healthcare system. If you'd like more information on any of the topics or researchers in this series, simply head to iht.deakin.edu.au.